Welcome back. Today we are going to talk about something that I find very fun, and I hope you will too. And we are going to talk about how to write a killer first line to your book. Like, what are the first words your readers are going to read about your story? Now, let's preface this lesson by saying I'm not talking about the preface or the introduction. While those pieces are important, and we talked about them more at length in another lesson, I'm really talking about what's the first line of your story, those first few words of your story where your story really begins. So, for purposes of this discussion, we're going to assume that your story starts on chapter 1, right? Page 1, chapter 1. And so we're going to talk about the first line that really hooks your reader into the story. Some readers, by the way, do skip the introduction and the preface or whatever kind of front matter that falls in a book. So I don't get those people, but but let's assume they're going to skip that, and the first thing they're going to read is your first line. So we talked about, in general, how to pinpoint where your story is starting, like on your timeline, your story arc. What is the first scene, or what really is the first thing that happens in your story? So we talked about that, and hopefully you have a pretty good idea of that particular moment in time that you want to start your story at. But we really haven't talked about where exactly in that scene or that moment that your readers are going to be first introduced to. So again, this is the very first line of your book, and not surprisingly, this can really stump a lot of writers. This is one of those like really anxiety-inducing moments where you're like, I have to get this right. It has to be perfect. Okay, and I totally get you. You want to craft a sentence that hooks them in right away, that puts your best impression forward, right? They want to be impressed with you. You know, you want them to be impressed with you. You want their interest piqued, and you want them just like salivating for more, right? You want to keep them reading and turning the page and being interested in everything else you have to say, right? This thick book you're going to give them. So, of course, while you should strive to write all of your lines in a very interesting and engaging way, the first line is arguably the most important. So we're going to spend time talking about those 5, 10, 15 words, right? The first line doesn't need to be very long, and sometimes that's the most effective. So here are a few tips to kind of get you started. First, if you feel stuck, I've said this a million times, just jump in and don't worry about it. Skip over your first line. You don't really have to start writing your book at the first line, right? You can kind of just jump in. Who cares what the first line looks like? Get your story out. And sometimes, not only does this kind of just keep you writing, but sometimes you get to a certain point in your story and you're kind of like, oh snap, this is my first line. Okay. Like you kind of know, you just intuitively feel into that moment of this line is important. This is an important point. The way I wrote this, the way I said this is gold, and I want this as my first line, or this is the connection point to my first line. So sometimes you can feel this, especially if you're starting at a point that kind of happens further along on your timeline, and then you take us back and you're writing and writing and writing, and you get back to that point. You're doing the loop, you circle back. When you get here to that point that you're starting your story at, even if you looped back to a different point in time, right? When you're in that moment and you're writing those scenes that you haven't written before, but where your story starts, I know you're following me here. I'm taking the long way around, clearly. When you get to that particular point in your story, that could really help you feel into where is this first line needing to live? What is my first line that is going to draw the reader in? So, long story short on this first point, just jump in and get started and keep going. And you can always come back to this first line later. So don't sweat it yet, right? So second, when you are thinking about your first line, keep in mind that like a good story is about change. This is so, so, so important. And believe me, we will be talking about this more, right? This is something I want to talk about more in depth: storytelling, the art of storytelling, how we use storytelling to connect with our readers, how you can do this in different contexts to pull them into your book. We'll be talking about this more, but that first line should allude to the fact that something big will be happening soon. It should allude to the fact that something big maybe already happened and you're dealing with it. But something maybe is on the horizon. Something is about to transpire and you are like, okay, this thing is happening. Are you with me, reader? Are you along for the ride? Because I'm going to take you on the ride here. So they're going to want to know what that thing is. What could possibly be happening? And again, this kind of ties back into that lesson on suspense, like giving your readers a little bit of a peek into what will be coming, that foreshadowing. You can kind of give them that little peek, that little snack, if you will, and then fill in some backstory. That kind of leads up to that first line moment. So, for example, I wrote this little example. There I stood at the edge of the cliff, wondering if he was still out there looking for me, or if he had given up already, as he had done so many other times. Okay, like what is she doing on the cliff? What's going to happen? What is she planning on doing? Why would he be looking for her? Why did he already give up looking for her? Clearly there's some danger or some drama happening, right? So this kind of gives us that like, okay, it's not vague in a sense that we don't see what's happening. She's standing on the edge of a cliff. Like we can kind of visualize that and we feel that she's kind of on edge, literally and physically, right? She's on edge. She's feeling like, is he looking for me? We don't know if she wants him to look for her. We don't know if she's like hoping he's not, right? Hoping he gave up like all the other times, or if that's a sense of pain for her. Why did he give up so many times? So again, that might be not to be punny. Like I think I've had like multiple little puns here, but that could be a little cliffhanger, right? You're just like leading them in. And then maybe the next sentence is, this all started 10 years ago, whatever, right? Like all the backstory comes in and we like have no resolution to this cliffhanger right away. That helps keep your reader engaged. Okay, well, what's going to happen on the cliff? I need to know. I have to know. I have to keep turning the page to know. So give them that little peek and then drag it out a little bit, not unintentionally, right? Not in a way that's boring and fluffy, full of stuff they don't need to know. Do it in a way that kind of keeps them moving. And then third, consider that first line that is an opportunity to lure your readers in with empathy, showing that, you've suffered this great moral wrong and you're now embarking on a journey to like correct the thing. So for example, it's kind of like the hero's journey, so to speak. So in my last example, you can kind of feel like maybe something big happened to her, but you don't necessarily know if she suffered a huge moral wrong. But when we see someone being mistreated, like a kid being abused, like no one cares what the backstory is there. We're just like, whoa, this is wrong. This is wrong on so many levels. And we jump in, right? In our heads, maybe we would jump into that situation to try to go help this poor innocent victim, right? So when we see that victim, we're connected. Our empathy is turned on. All of a sudden, we're just like, yep, we're in it. We're there. And that's a little tool you can use. We'll talk more about that in kind of the main storytelling context. But when you're thinking about your first line, if there is a way to kind of infuse a little bit of like, after 10 years of abuse, I walked away and whatever, right? Like you kind of give that little bit of history to show that you suffered the thing and you're now embarking on this journey of change. And the readers are like, okay, we need to know what's going on. So this one might be a little much for your first line. Like don't try to pack in like your whole story in that first line, but spend some time thinking about this and experimenting. What does this look like? What gives a good introductory line that tells your reader big things are happening, or maybe have already happened, or both, and helps you connect with them or them to you in a very human way, and helps them kind of, like I ticked off 5 or 6 questions about that line at the cliff. I wanted to know answers to all of those things. And I wasn't annoyed that I wasn't given those answers in that first line. So, like, we don't even know the dude's name. We don't know her name. We assume it's the author, right? But we don't know anything at that point. We just know this girl is standing at the edge of a cliff, and we don't even know what she's thinking. Is she going to jump? Is she just out there decompressing? Whatever, right? So I have all of these questions, and that keeps me engaged in the book. I'm going to keep reading. Now, I will say, if you want a decent example of this, if I can talk about myself like that, I did write a writing prompt for today, which is November 27th. If you're watching this in the future, you can go back and look for the writing prompt. I think it was number 44. I think we're on writing prompt number 44, so you can search for it. But that I implemented a little bit of that, of one of these techniques in that first line. I talked about some change, like this thing that was going to be happening. Like I sat there in this kind of vivid emotion before I clicked the button to press send on an email to my manager. And so I'm like, hey guys, you want to know what I'm sending? You want to know, do you want to know what I said in my email? Do you want to know if I clicked the button even? Like, did I have the courage to do it? So that is a good kind of, maybe it's not book worthy. I don't know. I don't like to judge my own writing yet on that level, but maybe it's a good example for you to just kind of see that in action. Because what I did was I kind of do that first sentence, and then I go into some backstory about how I got to that moment, and then I bring you back to that moment and show you, yes, I did click the button, and you do know what I sent and why I was. So the backstory explains why I was feeling that trepidation, and then what happened. So I give you that resolution. So it's a little short story, if you will. It's kind of that, we climax and we do the backstory and you feel the emotion, and then I give you the resolution so you feel that ending. So check that out if you'd like a small example of this. Otherwise, pick up a couple of your most favorite fiction books, like, all the Harry Potters, I'm sure, have amazing first lines. I know one in particular kind of talks about, I think it's the first one, how, I cannot remember the name. The name of the folks he lives with, they thought they were just fine. Thank you very much, or whatever, something like that, right? So you feel this sense of like, okay, they clearly aren't fine. Something is clearly going to happen, right? We all know kind of what happens if you're familiar with that story, but that alludes to something coming around the bend. And our brains are so attracted to change. We're biologically wired to watch for changes in our environment, in our body, in other people's behaviors, things going on. Our eyes sort of like can't not watch for change, and our senses are very tuned into it. So that is why we're hooked. That's why we're engaged. We have biological responses to this. And again, these are lessons for a different day, so you can understand the mental and physical state of your reader when they're reading a good story. So we will talk about this more, but I did want to help you kind of get that first line crafted, or at least started, and do a few different versions if you want, and drop them in the group. I'd love to hear, where you're feeling like this is working, maybe this isn't. If you have questions about like, what do you guys think about this first line? Is it engaging? Absolutely would love to give you that feedback. And, keep writing. That's the lesson for today.